The Golden State Warriors had just finished their morning practice at the Chase Center in San Francisco. The October air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of the bay as Stephen Curry walked toward the locker room, sweat still glistening on his forehead. His phone buzzed incessantly in his gym bag, the usual flood of notifications that came with being one of the NBA's biggest stars. Stephen had learned to filter through the noise years ago. Sponsorship deals, interview requests, fan messages, most could wait. But as he sat on the bench, unlacing his sneakers, something made him reach for his phone. The Instagram message was buried among hundreds of others, but the subject line made him pause. "We need to talk. It's about family." Great. Another scammer, Stephen thought, his thumb hovering over the delete button. But something in the message's tone felt different. It wasn't the usual desperate plea for money or attention. It was measured, almost hesitant. "Mr. Curry, I know this sounds crazy and I'm not asking for anything. My name is Marcus Williams. I'm 28 years old, and I believe you're my brother. I have documents that might interest you. If you're willing to listen, I'll be in Oakland tomorrow at Mosswood Park, where your father used to practice when he played for the Warriors. I'll wait from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. If you don't show, I'll understand and never contact you again." Stephen's hands trembled slightly as he read the message again. The mention of his father, Del Curry, and Mosswood Park sent a chill down his spine. That wasn't public knowledge. Del had indeed spent countless hours at that park during his brief stint with the Warriors in the early 90s, before Stephen was even born. "You good, Steph?" Draymond Green's voice cut through his thoughts. His teammate was standing nearby, concern etched on his face. "Yeah, I'm fine," Stephen replied, quickly pocketing his phone. But he wasn't fine. The message had awakened something he couldn't quite name, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and an inexplicable sense of longing. That evening, Stephen sat in his Atherton home, the message screenshot saved on his phone. The house was quiet. Aisha was putting the kids to bed upstairs, their laughter echoing through the halls. This was his sanctuary, his perfect life, NBA championships, a loving family, financial security. Why would he risk disrupting it for what was probably an elaborate hoax? But as he stared out at the manicured lawn, Stephen couldn't shake the image of his father at Mosswood Park. Del had told him stories about those days, the loneliness of being traded, the uncertainty of his career, the way basketball had been his only constant. "What if it's true?" Stephen whispered to himself, the words barely audible in the empty living room. The next morning brought no clarity. Stephen went through his routine: breakfast with the family, reviewing game footage, responding to texts from his agent. But the message remained at the forefront of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. By 1:30 p.m. he found himself driving toward Oakland, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The Warriors had a day off, and he'd told Aisha he was going to visit his parents. It wasn't entirely a lie. He might stop by afterward, depending on how this went. Mosswood Park looked exactly as his father had described it. Weathered basketball courts surrounded by towering oak trees, the city skyline visible in the distance. A few teenagers were playing pickup ball on one court, their voices carrying across the autumn air. Stephen parked his Tesla at the far end of the lot and pulled his hood up. Even with sunglasses, he was recognizable, and the last thing he needed was this moment becoming a social media spectacle. At exactly 2 p.m., a tall, lean figure approached the courts. Stephen's breath caught in his throat. The man walking toward him had his build, his stride, even the way he carried his shoulders. From a distance, they could have been brothers. Marcus Williams stood about 6'2", with caramel-colored skin and expressive brown eyes that seemed to hold years of untold stories. He wore a simple Warriors hoodie and jeans, and in his hands was a manila envelope that seemed to weigh more than it should. "Stephen?" Marcus called out, his voice carrying a familiar cadence that made Stephen's chest tighten. They met at center court, the same court where Del Curry had once practiced his shots. During those uncertain months in 1991, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and the distant sound of traffic created an urban symphony around them. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Marcus said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, familiar somehow. "Neither was I," Stephen admitted, studying Marcus's face. The resemblance was undeniable. They shared the same jawline, the same way their eyes crinkled when they were thinking. Marcus opened the envelope carefully, as if handling something sacred. "These are copies. I have the originals with my lawyer. Birth certificate, hospital records from Charlotte, North Carolina. March 15, 1995. Stephen's world tilted slightly. March 15, 1995. He would have been 7 years old, living in Charlotte while his father played for the Hornets. A time when Dell was at the height of his career, traveling constantly, when family life was complicated by the demands of professional basketball. "There's more," Marcus continued, his voice growing softer. "My mother, she worked at the hospital where you were born. She and your father, it was brief, and she never told him about me. She raised me alone, told me my father was someone who couldn't be in my life." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Stephen felt the ground beneath his feet shift, as if the very foundation of his understanding of his family was cracking. "She passed away 2 years ago," Marcus added quietly. "Cancer. It was only when I was going through her things that I found the letters, the photos. She kept everything, Stephen. Every newspaper clipping about your father, every article about you and Seth. She followed your careers from a distance." Stephen's vision blurred slightly. He thought about his mother, Sonia, and how this news would affect her. He thought about Seth, his brother and fellow NBA player, and how their dynamic might change. Most of all, he thought about this man standing before him, this stranger who might be family. "Why now?" Stephen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus smiled sadly. "Because I've spent my whole life wondering about the other half of who I am. I'm not asking for money or fame or anything from your world. I needed to know. And maybe, if you're willing, I'd like to know my brother." The word brother hit Stephen like a physical force. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw not just the physical resemblances, but something deeper. The way Marcus held himself with quiet dignity despite what must have been years of questions and longing. The careful way he'd approached this situation, respecting Stephen's privacy and giving him space to choose. "There's a way to know for sure," Stephen said finally. "DNA test. Are you willing?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I've already had mine done. The kit is in my car if you want to do yours now, or you can have it done privately. Whatever makes you comfortable." As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the court, Stephen realized that regardless of what the test revealed, something fundamental had already changed. This man, this possible brother, had shown him a side of his father's story he'd never known. And in doing so, he'd opened a door that Stephen wasn't sure he could close. "Let's do it," Stephen said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "But Marcus, if this is real, if you are my brother, everything changes. For both of us. Are you ready for that?" Marcus looked out at the court where their father had once played, then back at Stephen. "I've been ready my whole life." 2 weeks later, Stephen sat in his home office, staring at an unopened email marked "Confidential DNA Analysis Results." His finger hovered over his phone screen, but he couldn't bring himself to tap it. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like his swirling thoughts. Aisha knocked softly on the door. "The results came in, didn't they?" Stephen looked up at his wife, whose face showed the same mixture of anticipation and concern that had been present since he'd told her about Marcus 2 weeks ago. She'd been his anchor through this emotional storm, asking the right questions, offering perspective when his mind raced in circles. "I can't open it alone," Stephen admitted. "What if it's true? What if it's not? I don't know which answer scares me more." Aisha sat beside him, taking his hand. "Whatever it says, we'll figure it out together. But you need to know, Stephen. You'll never have peace until you do." With trembling fingers, Stephen opened the email. The scientific jargon filled the screen, but one line stood out in bold. Probability of siblingship, 99.97%. The phone slipped from Stephen's hands, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Marcus Williams was his brother, his half-brother, the man he'd met at Mosswood Park, who shared his love of basketball and his father's eyes, was family. "Oh, my God," Aisha whispered, reading over his shoulder. "Stephen, you have another brother." The emotions came in waves: shock, joy, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of loss for all the years they'd missed. Stephen thought about family dinners, childhood Christmases, all the moments Marcus should have been there for, all the moments Marcus had spent alone, wondering about the family he'd never known. His phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "You saw the results," Stephen said, answering on the first ring. "Yeah." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. "I've been staring at them for an hour. I don't know whether to laugh or cry." "Both," Stephen said, surprising himself with a laugh that turned into something closer to a sob. "I've been doing both." They arranged to meet that afternoon at Stephen's house. As Stephen waited for Marcus to arrive, he called his parents and Seth, needing to share the news before word somehow leaked out. Each conversation was harder than the last. His mother, Sonia, cried quietly on the phone. "Your father and we went through a rough patch around that time. He was on the road so much, and I was handling everything with you and Seth. We almost separated that year." Dell was silent for a long moment when Stephen told him. "I remember her," he finally said, his voice heavy with regret. "Maria. She was kind, and I was selfish and stupid. I never knew, son. I swear I never knew." Seth's reaction was more complex. "So I have another brother in the NBA family, huh?" he said, trying to lighten the mood. But Stephen could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Their bond as brothers had always been special, forged through shared experiences in their father's shadow and their mutual love of basketball. When Marcus arrived, Stephen opened the door to find him standing on the doorstep with the same overwhelmed expression Stephen had been wearing all day. They looked at each other for a moment, then simultaneously burst into laughter. "This is crazy," Marcus said. "Completely insane," Stephen agreed. "Come in, brother." The word felt strange but right on his tongue. They sat in Stephen's living room, the DNA results printed out on the coffee table between them like a bridge connecting two separate lives. "Tell me about yourself," Stephen said. "I mean, really tell me. I want to know everything." Marcus leaned back, a small smile playing at his lips. "Well, I'm a high school basketball coach in Richmond. Been doing it for 5 years now. My kids, they're from tough neighborhoods mostly. Basketball keeps them focused, gives them something to work toward. Like Dad did for us," Stephen said softly. "Yeah, I think so. I never had that father figure, but I had coaches who stepped up. Coach Martinez at De Anza High School, he probably saved my life. Kept me off the streets, made sure I graduated, even helped me get a partial scholarship to UC Davis." Stephen felt a pang of something. Guilt, maybe, or sadness for the different paths their lives had taken. "Did you play in college?" "Point guard. Just like you and Seth. Wasn't good enough for the pros, but I was decent. Good enough to understand what I was watching when you guys made it big." Marcus paused, his expression growing more serious. "Stephen, I need you to know. I followed your career, but I never resented you. Not you, not Seth, not Dad. I was proud. You were succeeding for all of us, even if you didn't know it." The sincerity in Marcus's voice hit Stephen harder than any physical blow. Here was a man who had every right to be bitter, to feel abandoned, to demand something from the family that had unknowingly left him behind. Instead, he'd built a life of service, coaching kids who needed guidance, embodying the same values that Dell had instilled in Stephen and Seth. "I want you to meet them," Stephen said suddenly. "Mom, Dad, Seth, the kids. I want you to meet your family." Marcus's eyes glistened. "Are you sure? I don't want to complicate things for you." "You're not complicating anything. You're completing something I didn't even know was missing." Over the next hour they exchanged stories, filling in the gaps of their separate childhoods. Marcus told Stephen about his mother, Maria, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to support them, who had never spoken bitterly about Dell despite raising Marcus alone. "She used to say that some people come into your life for a season, and that's okay," Marcus said. She never wanted me to be angry about it. She said Dad gave her the greatest gift, me, and that was enough. Stephen shared memories of family vacations, of Dell's patient coaching in their backyard, of the pressure and privilege of growing up as the son of an NBA player. He found himself apologizing repeatedly, until Marcus finally stopped him. "Don't apologize for the life you had, Stephen. Be grateful for it, and help me figure out how to be part of it going forward." As the afternoon wore on, they discovered more similarities. Their love of curry, the food which made them both laugh, their tendency to overthink decisions, their shared habit of shooting baskets when they needed to clear their heads. "There's something else," Marcus said as the conversation began to wind down. "The kids I coach, they know who you are, obviously. When word gets out about this, and it will get out, they're going to have questions. Some of them come from broken families, absent fathers. This story, it could mean something to them." Stephen nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what Marcus was saying. Their story wasn't just about two brothers finding each other. In a world where father figures were often absent, where family could be fractured by circumstances beyond anyone's control, their reunion could represent hope. "What do you need from me?" Stephen asked. "Just be my brother," Marcus said simply. "Everything else we can figure out as we go." As Marcus prepared to leave, Stephen walked him to the door. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the driveway, and Stephen was struck by how much his world had changed in the span of a few hours. "Marcus," he called out as his brother reached his car, "tomorrow night we're playing the Lakers at home. I want you there, courtside. It's time the world meets the newest member of the Curry family." Marcus turned back, his face breaking into a grin that was unmistakably familiar. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Stephen smiled back, feeling more certain than he had about anything in weeks. "I'm ready. The question is, are you ready to be Stephen Curry's brother in front of 18,000 people and a national television audience?" "I've been ready my whole life," Marcus replied, echoing the words he'd spoken at Mosswood Park 2 weeks earlier. As Stephen watched Marcus drive away, he realized that tomorrow night would be about more than basketball. It would be about family, about the power of truth, and about showing the world that sometimes the most important victories happen off the court. He pulled out his phone and started typing a text to his publicist. It was time the world knew about Marcus Williams, coach, teacher, and the brother he never knew he had. The Chase Center was electric with its usual pre-game energy, but Stephen felt a different kind of electricity coursing through his veins as he walked through the tunnel toward the court. In a few hours, he would be introducing Marcus to the world in the most public way possible, during a nationally televised game against the Lakers. The decision to go public had been his, but the execution had required careful coordination. His publicist, Rachel Kim, had worked overtime to manage the story, ensuring that Marcus's privacy was protected while still sharing the incredible narrative of their reunion. "ESPN wants an exclusive interview after the game," Rachel said, falling into step beside Stephen as he made his way to the locker room. "And Good Morning America is requesting both of you for tomorrow's show." Stephen nodded absently, his mind focused on Marcus, who was somewhere in the building getting the full VIP treatment. They'd decided that Marcus would watch the game from a courtside seat, with the announcement coming during halftime via a pre-recorded video message that Stephen had filmed that morning. In the locker room, his teammates sensed the tension. Draymond approached him during warm-ups, his expression serious. "You good, Steph? You seem different tonight." Stephen looked around at his teammates, men who had become like brothers to him over the years, who had shared championships and heartbreaks. "Actually, I want you all to know something before you hear it on TV. I have another brother, a half-brother I just found out about. He's here tonight." The locker room fell silent. Then Klay Thompson, ever the pragmatist, asked, "Is he going to mess with your shot selection?" The tension broke as everyone laughed, but Stephen could see the genuine curiosity and support in his teammates' faces. They peppered him with questions, and Stephen found himself sharing more details than he'd planned. It felt good to talk about it, to normalize what had felt surreal for the past few weeks. Meanwhile, Marcus was experiencing his own emotional journey in the arena. He'd arrived 2 hours before tip-off, wearing the Warriors jersey that Stephen had personally delivered to him that morning. Number 30. With M. Curry printed on the back. An usher led him to his courtside seat, and Marcus marveled at the view. He'd watched thousands of games on television, but being this close to the action was overwhelming. The sound system was testing different music, players were stretching on the court, and camera crews were setting up their equipment. "Mr. Curry?" A young woman with a press badge approached him. "I'm Sarah Chen from ESPN. Would you be willing to do a quick interview before the game? Just some background for our halftime segment?" Marcus had agreed to limited media access, understanding that their story was bigger than just his and Stephen's personal journey. As Sarah set up her camera, Marcus thought about the kids he coached back in Richmond. They'd be watching tonight, probably gathered around the TV in the community center, cheering for their coach's famous brother. "How does it feel to be here tonight?" Sarah asked as the cameras rolled. Marcus looked out at the court where Stephen was warming up, effortlessly draining three-pointers from increasingly impossible angles. "It feels like coming home to a place I've never been," he said thoughtfully. "I've watched Stephen play for years, but seeing him as my brother, it's different. I'm not just watching a superstar anymore. I'm watching family." The game itself was vintage Stephen Curry. Perhaps inspired by having Marcus in the crowd, Stephen was unconscious from three-point range, hitting 7 in the first half. Alone. Each time he made a shot, he would glance toward Marcus's seat, and Marcus would stand and cheer with the rest of the crowd. During a timeout in the second quarter, Stephen jogged over to where Marcus was sitting. The crowd noticed the interaction, cameras zooming in as Stephen said something that made Marcus laugh. Social media immediately began buzzing with speculation about the unknown man in the Curry jersey sitting courtside. At halftime, with the Warriors leading 78-65, the arena, screens lit up with Stephen's pre-recorded message. The crowd quieted as Stephen appeared on screen, sitting in the same chair where he'd done countless interviews over the years. "Warriors fans," Stephen began, his voice carrying the weight of emotion. "Family has always been the most important thing in my life. Tonight I want to share something special with you. 2 weeks ago I discovered I have a brother I never knew existed. Marcus Williams, who's here with us tonight, is a high school basketball coach from Richmond, and he's shown me what it really means to be part of a family." The camera cut to Marcus, who waved awkwardly as 18,000 people suddenly focused their attention on him. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the building. Marcus has dedicated his life to coaching young people, showing them that basketball can be a pathway to something better, Stephen continued in the video. "He's never asked for anything from our family except the chance to be part of it. Tonight I'm proud to introduce you to my brother, Marcus Williams." The video ended with footage of Stephen and Marcus shooting baskets together at a local gym, their similar shooting forms unmistakable. As the lights came back up for the second half, Marcus was wiping tears from his eyes while the crowd continued to cheer. The second half belonged to both brothers in different ways. Stephen continued his shooting clinic, finishing with 42 points and 11 three-pointers. But the cameras kept cutting to Marcus, who was being embraced by Warriors fans around his seat, signing autographs on napkins and taking pictures with children who seemed to instinctively understand the magic of the moment. With 3 minutes left in the game and the Warriors leading by 25, Steve Kerr made an unprecedented decision. He called timeout and gestured for Marcus to come down to the bench. The crowd realized what was happening before Marcus did, their cheers growing louder as he made his way courtside. "Marcus," Coach Kerr said, extending his hand, "your brother says you can still shoot. We're up big. The game's decided. Want to take a shot with your family?" Marcus looked at Stephen, who was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "One shot," Stephen said. "Make it count." The crowd was on its feet as Marcus, still wearing his street clothes under the Warriors jersey, checked into the game with 2:47 remaining. The Lakers, understanding the moment, didn't press him as he brought the ball up court. Stephen set a screen for his brother, and Marcus found himself with an open look from three-point range. The arena fell silent as he rose up for the shot, using the same form that had earned him a college scholarship years earlier. The ball arced through the air, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Then it swished through the net without touching the rim. The Chase Center erupted. Stephen ran to Marcus and lifted him off the ground. In a bear hug. His teammates mobbed them both. Even Lakers players came over to congratulate Marcus, understanding they'd been part of something special. In the post-game interview, Stephen was asked about the shot. "That's what Marcus does," he said, his arm around his brother's shoulders. "He makes the big shots when it matters. He's been doing it his whole life, for his students, for his community, for everyone who needed him. Tonight, he did it for all of us." Marcus, still overwhelmed by the experience, was asked what the moment meant to him. "I've spent my whole life wondering what it would be like to have a brother," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Now I know. It feels like this. Like being supported. Like belonging. Like being part of something bigger than yourself." Later that night, after the interviews and the celebrations, Stephen and Marcus sat alone in the empty arena. The lights were dimmed. The crowd was gone. But the magic of the evening lingered in the air. "So," Stephen said, "how was your first NBA experience?" Marcus laughed, still holding the game ball that Coach Kerr had given him. "Pretty good. Think I might want to try it again sometime." "Good," Stephen said, "because you're part of this family now, and this family shows up for each other." As they sat there, two brothers who had found each other against all odds, Marcus thought about his mother, Maria, and how proud she would have been of this moment. Not because her son had made a shot in an NBA game, but because he'd finally found his place in the family she'd always told him he belonged to. The story was far from over, but this chapter, played out under the bright lights of the Chase Center in front of millions of viewers, had shown the world something powerful about family, forgiveness, and the unexpected places where love can be found. 3 months after that magical night at Chase Center, Marcus Williams stood before a packed auditorium at Richmond High School, but his mind was on the conversation he'd had with Stephen that morning. What had started as a personal family reunion had evolved into something neither brother could have anticipated, a movement that was changing lives across the country. "Coach Williams," called out Jasmine, one of his players, from the front row, "tell us again about the scholarship program." Marcus smiled, looking out at the sea of young faces, his players, their families, and dozens of other kids from the community who had come to hear about the new initiative. The Family Found Foundation, established jointly by Stephen and Marcus just 6 weeks after their public reunion, was already making waves. The Stephen and Marcus Curry Family Found Scholarship doesn't just give money for college, Marcus explained. It's for kids who've grown up without father figures, kids who've had to find their own way, just like I did, just like some of you are doing right now. In the audience, 16-year-old Devin raised his hand. Devin was Marcus's point guard, a kid with incredible talent but a home situation that kept him on edge. "Coach, you really think college scouts are coming to see us play because of your brother?" "They're coming to see you play because you're good enough," Marcus corrected gently. "Stephen's name might get them in the door, but your talent and character keep them there." This was the balance Marcus had been learning to navigate over the past 3 months. Stephen's fame opened doors, but Marcus was determined that his kids would walk through them on their own merit. It was a philosophy that Stephen not only supported, but had helped shape. After the meeting, Marcus drove to San Francisco for dinner with Stephen's family, a weekly tradition they'd established. The routine had become precious to both brothers, a way to build the relationship they'd missed out on for 28 years. Uncle Marcus, Riley and Ryan, Stephen's daughters, ran to greet him as he entered the house. Watching them, Marcus was struck by how naturally they'd accepted him into their family. Children, he'd learned, were remarkably adaptable when it came to love. "How are my favorite nieces?" Marcus asked, scooping them up in a hug. The word nieces still felt new on his tongue, but each time he said it, it felt more natural. At dinner, Aisha asked about the scholarship applications they'd been receiving. "The response has been incredible," Marcus reported. "Over 2,000 applications in 6 weeks. Kids from single-parent homes, foster care, grandparents raising grandchildren. Each story is heavy," Stephen finished. "I've been reading them too. Some of these kids have been through more in 17 years than most people face in a lifetime." Cannon, Stephen's youngest, who was barely talking, pointed at Marcus and said clearly, "Unca Marcus." The table fell silent for a moment, then erupted in laughter and applause. It was Cannon's first clear pronunciation of Marcus's name, and somehow it felt like another milestone in their growing family bond. Later, as they sat on Stephen's back deck overlooking the bay, the brothers talked about something that had been weighing on both their minds: their father. Del had struggled with Marcus's presence in the family more than anyone else, not because he didn't want Marcus there, but because Marcus's existence was a constant reminder of Del's past mistakes. Their first meeting, 2 weeks after the Chase Center game, had been awkward and painful. "He called me yesterday," Marcus told Stephen. "First time in a month." "What did he say?" "He asked if I wanted to go fishing this weekend. Just him and me." Marcus paused, watching a sailboat navigate the choppy bay waters. "I think he's trying, Stephen. I think he wants to be a father to me, even though I'm 28 years old." Stephen nodded thoughtfully. "Dad's always been better at showing love than talking about it. Give him time. Give yourself time." Their conversation was interrupted by Stephen's phone buzzing with a text from his publicist. A major network wanted to do a documentary about their story, not just the reunion, but the foundation, the impact on their respective communities, and the broader message about family and forgiveness. "What do you think?" Stephen asked, showing Marcus the message. Marcus considered it carefully. Over the past few months, he'd learned to weigh the benefits of publicity against the cost to his privacy and his students' well-being. "Only if we control the narrative," he said finally, "and only if it helps more kids. The moment this becomes about us, instead of them, we're done." The next morning, Marcus was back in Richmond leading his team through practice. The gym was different now. New equipment donated by Warriors fans, fresh paint on the walls, and a small plaque by the door that read, "Family Found Gymnasium, Home of the Richmond Lions." But the most significant change wasn't visible. It was in the way his players carried themselves. The way they talked about their futures. The way they'd embraced the message that family could be found and created, not just inherited. "Coach," Devin approached him after practice, holding a letter. "I got into UC Berkeley, full academic scholarship." Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes. Devin had been working toward this goal for 2 years, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while dealing with an unstable home situation. "Dev, this is incredible. I'm so proud of you." "The essay that got me in," Devin continued, "it was about you and Mr. Stephen, about how watching you two find each other taught me that family isn't about who was there at the beginning. It's about who shows up when you need them." That afternoon, Marcus called Stephen to share the news about Devin. They talked for an hour, as they did most days, checking in on each other's lives, sharing stories, continuing to build the relationship that felt both new and ancient. "There's something I've been thinking about," Stephen said, toward the end of their conversation. "The All-Star break is coming up. Instead of some fancy vacation, what if we spent the week working with kids? Maybe take some of your players to meet some of mine from my camp. Show them that this thing we're building is bigger than just us." Marcus smiled even though Stephen couldn't see him. This was what he loved most about his brother. Stephen's instinct was always to include others, to use his platform for something meaningful. "I love it," Marcus said. "But let's make sure we're not just doing basketball. Let's talk to them about family, about finding their place in the world, about creating the support systems they need." A week later, the brothers found themselves at a community center in Oakland, surrounded by 50 teenagers from various programs. Some were Marcus's players from Richmond, others were kids from Stephen's summer camps, and still others were scholarship recipients from their foundation. Stephen was in the middle of explaining a complex basketball play when a 15-year-old named Amara raised her hand. "Mr. Curry, can I ask you something that's not about basketball?" "Of course. My mom says I need to be careful about getting too excited about having mentors and people who promise to help, because people leave. How do I know you and Coach Marcus aren't going to disappear when the cameras stop rolling?" The question hung in the air, raw and honest. Stephen looked at Marcus, and in that moment, both brothers understood the weight of what they'd committed to. "Amara," Marcus said, stepping forward. "I can't promise that Stephen and I will never let you down. We're human, and humans make mistakes. But I can promise you this: we're not going anywhere. This isn't a project or a publicity stunt. You're family now, all of you. And family shows up." Stephen nodded, adding, "My brother's right. We found each other after 28 years of not knowing the other existed. If we can find each other, we can find ways to be there for all of you. But more importantly, you're going to find ways to be there for each other." As the session continued, something beautiful happened. The kids began sharing their own stories about teachers who had made a difference, coaches who had believed in them, friends who had become chosen family. The conversation evolved from a Q&A with celebrities into a genuine discussion about resilience, community, and hope. That evening, as Marcus drove back to Richmond, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been a high school basketball coach with a secret and a message he wasn't sure he should send. Now he was part of something that was touching lives across the country. His phone rang, and Stephen's name appeared on the dashboard. "Good day today, brother," Stephen said when Marcus answered. "The best," Marcus agreed. "You know what the best part was? Tell me." "Watching those kids realize they're not alone, that there are people who care about them, who see their potential, who are willing to invest in their futures. Just like someone did for me," Stephen said quietly. "Just like someone did for you." As Marcus pulled into his driveway, he thought about his mother, Maria, and the sacrifices she'd made to raise him alone. He thought about Coach Martinez, who had kept him focused during his teenage years. He thought about all the people who had shown up in his life when he needed them most. Now he and Stephen were showing up for others, creating ripples of support and love that would extend far beyond anything they could imagine. They'd found each other, but more importantly, they'd found their purpose as brothers, not just to each other, but to every young person who needed to know that family could be found in the most unexpected places. The story that had started with a simple message on social media had become something much larger, a testament to the power of family, forgiveness, and the courage to reach out when you need connection the most. And in community centers, high school gymnasiums, and scholarship offices across the country, that story was continuing to unfold, one young life at a time.